Hello everyone and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the Hindu newspaper of 10th March 2024. Now before we begin, quick advice to all of you that there are other initiatives also that we are running on the channel, like there is the daily quiz that we run every evening at 6 p.m. So this is also something that can be very important for you, especially from the prelims perspective. And one highlight of the daily quiz that we conduct is that we also go beyond the articles in the Hindu. We also take articles from the PIB and the Indian Express and we discuss them from prelims perspective. So do check them out as well. And also a reminder to all of you to subscribe to the channel, like our videos and look at all the initiatives that we have on this channel. Now let's look at all the topics that we have for today's session. Now first thing that we have, there are two topics that are to be covered in detail. One, why India urgently needs a legal framework for genomics, and this is on page number 12. And then why has government issued an AI advisory, and this is on page number 13. So these are the two articles that we are going to cover in detail. And then looking at all the topics that we have from prelims perspective, Kozhikode to get India's first cooperatives museum, Navy demonstrate twin carrier operations, carbon dioxide from chemical weathering has its limits, and then India to gain higher investments from FTA pact with EFTA. So these are the four articles that we are going to cover from prelims perspective. So let's begin with the first article, and this is on page number 12, why India urgently needs a legal framework for genomics. Now overall, when it comes to this article, let's first try to understand what this article is saying. What it says is that there is an unprecedented scale of sequencing and analysis right now in the world, and our ability to sequence, to analyze and to interpret genomes at an unprecedented scale has been observed not only across the world but also in India. And it also talks about decreasing costs, that how the cost of sequencing continue to plummet and it has made it more accessible worldwide. Now overall, when it comes to the understanding of how exactly we need to see this, there are certain issues that have been pointed out in this particular article. So we'll understand what those issues are, and then from there on we'll try to understand the basics of it as well. So this is the context of this article, that there is an urgent need for legal framework, especially for data protection and prevent discrimination based on genetic information. Now overall, when we look at all these aspects, we need to understand that overall in a lot of other countries we see that there is a foundation being set for very widespread clinical use of genetic information, and that's why we see that looking at all these aspects, we need to understand that it is expected to become very common in clinical settings, and hence there are new opportunities that we have here. Population scale programs will be there, and these will offer new opportunities for the healthcare and research in the segment of genetics. Now, although these all things are good, but there are significant challenges that we face here. These advancements, they are presenting significant new problems, and this is with regards to data protection, equitable access of the data, and also preventing discrimination in this aspect. Now, what is India's position? We see that there is a rapid progress in India. India has made a significant progress in genome sequencing efforts. First, when you go back to 2006 efforts, then 2009, and then 2019, where again we see that recently we had discussed also about this, that India has done 10,000 genome sequencing recently. So that's why in India we see that there are these progress as well, and this is where it will contribute to the understanding of the diseases especially which are prevalent in India. So that's why we need to understand all these issues and how exactly India needs to move forward. And that's why we see that there is a need, given the very large and diverse population that India has, there is a need to balance the ambition with pragmatism to ensure that genomics benefits are reaching the people all across the country. And this is where this article also talks about the legal and the policy framework requirements, that there is an urgent need for legal framework, especially for data protection and to prevent discrimination which is based on genetic information. Now, here what we also see is that current regulations allow for the exploitation of Indian genetic samples by foreign entities, where a lot of multinational companies, a lot of pharmaceutical companies based out of Europe, based out of US, they have been using Indian data. They have been sampling Indian data, and there is no particular regulation which stops them from doing that. So maybe there is also a way in which India can look into these kind of aspects as well. Similarly, without a framework in data aggregation, public health decision making is also getting hampered. So that's why we need to understand that there are all these issues with regards to the gene sequencing. Now, before we go on to understand the various aspects of the issues, let's also understand some of the basics related to what exactly are we talking about. So, 4 concepts that I would say become important here in this context to understand what do we mean by DNA, what do we mean by genes, and what do we mean by chromosomes, and ultimately, since we are talking about genome sequencing, what do we mean by genome. So these 4 things we should understand. Now, very first thing is the DNA. Now, when we look at DNA, you can think of DNA as alphabets of a book. Just as an alphabet consists of letters which are used to form the words and sentences, DNA is made up of chemical bases. Alright, base like acid and base you have read of. So those kind of base. So that's why there are these 4 bases that the DNA is made of. And these 4 bases, they are arranged in a sequence to encode the information. Alright, so basically what happens is that you have these 4 where we see that 2 of them always will combine simultaneously. Now, when it comes to the combination of these 4, you have to understand that these combinations, they are like letters of, just imagine that we are talking about a book. Alright, the very basic building block of a book will be certain letters, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So now these letters, when they combine in a certain logical way, then in that case they start making sense for us, correct? Then they start making words, and hence they start forming sentences out of it. And this is exactly what happens inside our cells also, that inside the cells we have something called as the nucleus, and inside the nucleus we have the DNA. And that's why just understand that DNA, you can say in a manner, are like the alphabets of a book. Just like how the alphabets consist of all the letters which are used to form words and sentences, similarly you have the DNA that are arranged in sequences to encode information. What kind of information? Everything or every attribute of any organism. For example, let's say in terms of humans, if you talk about, then in case of humans you can say that, okay, color of the skin, color of the eye, color of the hair, or the height and the structure of the body, each and everything will be determined by these DNA. So that's why these DNA, now when they get logically arranged in a certain sequence, they form a gene. So a gene, in a manner you can say that these are like the sentences or the paragraphs in a book, and it's a very specific sequence of DNA or these DNA bases that provide the instructions for the body to make a particular protein and perform specific functions, just like how sentences can convey a very specific idea or instruction. So similarly you can think of the gene as well, that in case of genes are nothing but, you can say, a sequence of DNA, a logical sequence of DNA, just like how sentences start making sense to us. Similarly, the genes, when they are arranged properly, when they are an arrangement of proper set of DNA, they also start to make sense, and that is basically all the physical attributes basically come from there. So that's why there is a gene for everything. There is a gene inside our body because of which we are able to do everything that you do, and there is a gene for everything because of which you are who you are. So that's why the genes become very, very crucial in this particular sense. And then after that we have the chromosomes. Now chromosomes basically can be considered as the chapter of this book. So you have the letters first, which are the DNA, then you have the logical sentences and paragraphs, which are like the genes, and then you have the entire chapter made of those paragraphs and sentences, and this chapter is a chromosome. So chromosome is like a chapter of the book, and each chromosome contains very long strings of genes or these sentences. And especially, for example, if you talk about the humans, you might know that humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. 23 pairs, meaning that there are a total of 46 chromosomes in our body, making up the complete set of instructions that are divided into all these chapters. And then lastly, we have the genome. Genome, in a manner, you can say, is the entire book. All right, it is entire book. So for example, when we say human genome, so human genome, in a manner, you can say that there are 23 pairs. For example, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So in a manner, you can say that there are 23 pairs of chapters that are there in this human genome book. So that's why the genome is exactly like the entire book, and it will have all the genetic material of an organism, including all the genes or the sentences, and all the chromosomes that are all the chapters. And the human genome, for example, it's like a very comprehensive manual that contains all the instructions that are needed to build and maintain this organism that is humans. So that's why just understand that how exactly these are different, because many a times we keep using these terms very interchangeably as well. So that's why you should understand that DNA, you can say that these are like letters, genes, these are like sentences, or even in that sense you can say that these are like paragraphs, and then you have the chromosomes, which are small thread-like structures, and these chromosomes are like the chapters. And then when we say genome, genome is like the entire book itself. So that's why this is how the arrangement is. So that's why it's very necessary for us to understand that these are not all the same things. These are all different. That DNA is the basic building block, genes are segments of DNA, and chromosomes are the house of the genes, and then the genome is basically the entire set of these chromosomes. So this is how we see that these are all different. So just understand the basic structure. Now coming back to the article and discussing what all have been discussed, the various issues that have been discussed. Now what are these issues? First, in terms of accessibility and cost. While the sequencing costs are decreasing, making the genomics more accessible, there remains a challenge in ensuring the widespread clinical use as well. And that's why, especially in the case of the diverse and populous country like India, it is very, very important for us to understand these issues. Similarly, when we look at the population scale genome programs, the implementation of these programs worldwide have offered tremendous opportunities, but also present a lot of challenges in analyzing, handling, and protecting vast amount of data in the genome sequencing. Similarly, when we look at the fragmentation of genomic data, that overall we see that one issue that we also face is that genomic data or genetic data remains in silos, right? Because there are many companies, there are many agencies which are doing these sequencing and analyzing all that data. So that's why this is something which hinders the ability to use aggregated data for public health decisions and research purpose. So that's why we need to understand these perspectives. Similarly, the problem of discrimination, the risk of discrimination which is based on genetic information affecting the access to maybe insurance, employment opportunities, and even maybe social inclusion without having any proper protective laws against it. So that's why we need to understand the discrimination based on genetic information. So that's why we need to understand these aspects, and hence the issue of equity and diversity has to be addressed. That addressing the need for equitable access to genomic technologies, preventing the widening of existing healthcare access gaps, and also ensuring diverse population representation in the genomic research is very, very important to avoid any kind of bias in the research. Similarly, when it comes to ethical and the evidence-based use, we need to understand that ensuring that genomics is used ethically with a focus only based on evidence-based application to truly ensure that we are able to benefit healthcare, including maybe the development and validation of the genomic or the genomic test, is very, very necessary. So that's why from that perspective, we need to understand the importance of policy and regulation, the importance of establishing clear policies and regulations to foster innovations, trust and collaboration in the genomics field, especially in case of India and of course globally as well. So that's why there are these challenges, these issues that remain right now, we need to address. And overall, when it comes to the importance of genomic data protection, there are certain aspects that we need to understand. That first, the kinds of concerns that we have. For example, the privacy concerns. That when it comes to genomic data contains highly personal information about an individual, including the predisposition to certain health conditions, the physical traits, and also maybe potentially even behavioral tendencies that a person has. So that's why unauthorized access or misuse of this data could lead to privacy violations, which can be very, very dangerous. And maybe we start moving into a scenario where the risk of discrimination starts to increase. That without adequate protection, genomic data could be used to discriminate against individuals in various spheres of life. For example, maybe in employment, in insurance, in social opportunities, in economic opportunities. For instance, let's say insurers might deny the coverage or increase the premium for certain individuals with some kind of genetic disposition or predisposition to maybe certain disease. That, okay, let's say for example, let's say an insurance company and health insurance company has the access to your genetic data. All right. Now, what can they do? Let's say there are certain genes that they have seen in you, and these genes perhaps are related to maybe a disease like diabetes occurring maybe in future, maybe in next 20 years of time. That, for example, we know that diabetes can be genetic in nature, that if somebody's parents have diabetes, there are chances that this person might also have diabetes in the future. So now that they have the access to your genetic data, they know that you are carrying those genes. So there is an aspect of diabetes occurring, maybe not now, but maybe 2 decades later. But still, because they have seen those genes, they would say that, okay, fine, because you have those genes, then it means that you have higher probability of diabetes developing in you. And that's why you have to pay a higher premium with add-ons for diabetes, etc. So these kind of things become a possibility. And if you have taken health insurance, you might have seen how they give you that this disease cover will be given for X amount of extra money if you pay them. So these kind of problems can start occurring even more in these situations. And then comes the misuse of data. That like any kind of digital data, genomic information is also vulnerable to hacking and unauthorized access. The breach that can happen in this, it could lead to exposure of sensitive health information, and it can lead to also potential misuse of data. So for example, let's say for instance, a pharmaceutical company might tell you that, okay, we have seen your genes, this X, Y and Z genes are present in your body. It means that you can have this, that and that disease. So that's why here is our medical package. If you take this medical package, you will live. If you don't, you know what can happen. So these kind of, especially in these kind of situations, what happens is that in a manner, they will try to instill that fear in you. And fear works the best when it comes to healthcare. That if you are afraid of dying, you'll probably do whatever they say. And unfortunately, this is where science a lot of times can be misused as well. We see that, you just look at any advertisement of any cosmetic product or maybe any electronic product and look at how they use science. They'll always keep throwing at you a lot of advanced technological terms that in the meaning of, okay, there is quantum science behind this electronic device, or there is nanotechnology behind this cosmetic product, and nanotechnology is helping you having better skin and better hair and all that. So a very prime example is of charcoal. That how today in cosmetics everything has charcoal. Your toothpaste has charcoal, your shampoo has charcoal, your soap has charcoal and whatnot. Why charcoal? Perhaps you have never asked. Maybe you don't even know why charcoal. They would explain you something and you would just believe it, because if somebody says something in a believable manner, you might well believe it without even doing any kind of background research on what was said. And this is especially true in case of technology, that in technology the technological terms or jargons can be misused against you. There is an entire book that has been written on it. For anyone who's interested, there is a book named Bad Science. So if you have time and if you have interest, just go and read that book. And you'll find how in every sphere of your life, whether it is healthcare, in cosmetics, in your diet and whatnot, science is misused. And how it is misused, the author has completely laid it down in that particular book. And that's why we need to understand many a times that what the advertisement is saying perhaps may not be true. But these kind of things will be elevated further when your genetic information is easily known or the data is not protected enough. So that's why it needs to be understood. Similarly, there are ethical implications, that the use of genetic data raises ethical questions as well, such as maybe the consent for the use of the research, or implications for the family members who may share similar genetic traits, and also the potential for maybe creating a stigma based on the genetic characters. So that's why we need to understand there are concerns with regards to this. And even lastly, even creation of weapons of mass destruction. Suppose that the entire genetic data of India is leaked and somebody in China has an access to it. Now what can they do? They can try to find common genes across India, because yes, Indian subcontinent has been in a manner isolated for thousands of years. You have the peninsular part where you are protected by the seas. In the upper portion, the northern parts, you have the Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Thar, and these are all physical barriers. So in a manner, this is an isolated state altogether. So what happens then? That there will be common genes all across the country, and these common genes can be targeted. They may create a weapon of mass destruction tomorrow, which is only targeting the Indian genes. So you cannot say that it can't happen. Right now, it hasn't happened yet. Who knows? I mean, there are things being said about the COVID-19 virus. There are reports published by the US about the COVID-19 virus that it may have been created in a lab. Whether it has been created in a lab or not, nobody knows, and it is China, you will never know. So information will never be transparent enough from China for you to know whether it was created in the lab or not. But there are reports and we know that it's possible. We keep talking about zombie virus and how the scientists have been working on the zombie virus. So we know that all these things are possible. So that's why importance of genetic data protection, we have to understand that how these things can really go wrong, and that's why we need to take all the steps possible in ensuring the protection of the data. Moving on to the next article, why has government issued an AI advisory? Now what exactly is this particular article saying? Now overall, what we see is that the government, because of certain issues related to the Gemini of Google and certain issues with ChatGPT, etc., there is an advisory. So on 1st of March, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology issued an advisory to the artificial intelligence industry. And what it said is that all the generative AI products that like large models on the lines of ChatGPT and Google's Gemini would have to be made available with the explicit permission of the government of India if they are under testing or they are unreliable. Now here basically what has happened, there have been some controversies with regards to what kind of image recreation they have done or what kind of questions they have answered. So based on that, there have been certain concerns which have been raised against the use of generative AI especially. Now in this context, the larger discussion is about the bias in artificial intelligence, that what exactly can happen, what can go wrong, and the article has mentioned what government should do and what government should not do. All these kind of things have been discussed, but we'll go one step further from that, and we'll understand what are the various problems that can happen, what can creep into the systems related to AI, and what are the things that the government needs to do, what are the kinds of regulations that can help the growth of AI in long term. So that's why these are the things that we need to understand. So in terms of what we are talking of, we are basically talking about bias in AI. Now, in case of when we talk about bias in AI, what we mean by bias is that it is something, you can say, a systematic and unfair disparity that in operations or in output or impact of AI systems can come in. And these biases, many a times when it comes to these biases basically can arise from the data which are used to train the AI models. Maybe the design of the AI models themselves, or maybe the ways in which they have been deployed. So that's why understanding the various different types of biases and addressing them is very, very crucial in developing fair, ethical and trustworthy AI system. So that's why there are certain aspects of bias that we should understand. So there are different types of biases. So what are the types of biases? Let's try to understand that. The first kind of bias that we have in an AI system is called as data bias. It is called as data bias. Now, data bias basically occurs when the training data that has been used for AI models, that is not representative of the broader population or scenario that it has been intended to serve. And that's why this is something that can lead to skewed or unfair outcomes when the AI systems are being deployed. Similarly, there is something called as algorithm bias or algorithmic bias. Now, in case of algorithm or algorithmic bias, we see that this is where we see that even when you have unbiased data, the algorithms themselves can introduce bias which are based on how they are designed to learn and make decisions. And this can be due to maybe oversimplified assumptions, flawed model designs, or even other algorithmic decisions that we have taken while designing the algorithm itself. So the problem is that the algorithm that we are designing, that algorithm itself is biased, and that's why the outcome that you are getting out of that AI system itself is biased. Similarly, there is something called as prejudice bias. Alright, prejudice bias. Now, this is a form of bias which basically happens when pre-existing societal, cultural or institutional biases are reflected in the AI training data. And it is something that can have stereotypes or maybe discriminatory practices which have just come into the system because of the prejudice that we have while designing the system. And then there is something called as measurement bias. Alright, we have something called as measurement bias. Now, in terms of measurement bias, this is something that occurs when the tools or the methods that have been used in collecting the data, they themselves are biased. And this can happen if, let's say, the measurement tools are more suited to certain groups maybe than others, or maybe this is something that can lead to skewed data and not perfectly correct data that we needed. Then similarly, there can be something which is also called as sampling bias. And sampling bias is something that can arise when the sample data that has been used to train an AI system, that is not proper, or that is not properly, let's say, random or maybe comprehensive. And this is something that can lead to models that are not generally very well ascertained to the entire population which they are meant to serve. So that's why there can be sampling bias. So sampling bias is basically in the terms of the sample that we have used, the sample of the population size that we have used. Even that can have a problem. And then after that, there are some of the other biases also. For example, there is something called as confirmation bias. And this can occur when the development of the AI systems, when the developers unconsciously favor some kind of hypothesis or data that confirm their pre-existing beliefs or hypothesis. That I believe something, and whatever I have designed, it has been designed according to my beliefs. So that's why this is something which is called as confirmation bias. Called as confirmation bias. And then lastly, there can be something called as association bias. Now, association bias occurs due to the associations that are learned by the AI systems from the biased cultural or societal or historical context which are present in the training data, which can also lead to the learning of the biases in correlations and in outcomes. So that's why there are all these different types of bias. I know I've gone little beyond what has been discussed, but you need to know this because nowadays there have been a lot of discussions about the biases that can come into an AI system. So that's why just know about these kind of biases and how exactly all these things can happen. So for example, let's say how let's say no the loan may not be given to you, or maybe the health insurance may not be given to you. So based on basically what based on basically the data notions that the notions that have come, or let's say the simplicity of the training many a times may lead to these kind of things. That let's say whatever data you have selected for your health insurance, so that health insurance all the medical history that you have submitted, maybe AI has flagged something because of incorrect training of the AI, and the AI might just reject your health insurance. And if the companies are completely reliant on this kind of data from AI based data in health insurance, this can happen. So it can happen with loans, it can happen with insurances, it can happen with anything. So that's why these are things which are actually possible. So from the bias, we also need to understand how to address these bias. What can be done to address these biases? First, what we need is a diverse and representative data. That ensuring that the data or the training data is diverse, it is comprehensive, and it also represents all the population or all the scenario that the AI system is supposed to serve. So that's why first thing here is to have a diverse and representative data. Diverse and representative data, right? So that's why here what we have to ensure that this involves very actively seeking out and including all the underrepresented groups also in the data. Similarly, to ensure that there is a bias detection and mitigation technique that is being used. All right, so that's why bias detection and mitigation. Bias detection and mitigation. Now this also becomes very crucial, that we need to employ statistical and machine learning techniques which are specifically designed to detect and mitigate all the bias in the AI models. And this can maybe include regular audits and fairness assessments, etc., that can help in ensuring all this. Similarly, maintaining transparency in AI. Developing AI systems that are transparent about their decision-making processes and that can provide explanations for their outputs, because this is something that can identify and address all the kinds of potential biases. So that's why another important thing will be to maintain transparency. All right, to maintain transparency is very, very important. Now, after this, one more thing can be about developing ethical AI frameworks. All right, implementing ethical frameworks and guidelines for AI development that are specifically addressing the bias, fairness, and any kind of discrimination that can happen in the system. And this can include ethical reviews and maybe impact assessments, etc. So that's why including ethical frameworks become important. Ethical frameworks. And then also to have maybe interdisciplinary teams that including, let's say, diverse perspectives in the AI development teams, incorporating expertise from the various different fields, such as maybe social sciences, ethics, law, etc. This can help in identifying and mitigating the biases that the technologists might have overlooked. So that's why this also becomes very, very crucial, that we should have teams from all the disciplines. All right, so that's why interdisciplinary teams. And then the regulation and the legal compliance, ensuring that the AI systems comply with all the existing non-discriminatory or anti-discrimination laws and regulations. Regulatory frameworks can also provide guidelines for addressing all the kinds of bias in the AI. So that's why regulations can also be important, and that's why all these things become very, very crucial. So regulations. Regulatory frameworks or regulations become very, very crucial. Also, it ensures that all the stakeholders, that we engage with all the stakeholders, including all the communities which are affected by the AI systems, to understand their concerns and perspectives on bias and fairness. And this also can inform maybe more equitable AI development practices. So that's why there are a lot of things that can be done, and that's why when it comes to the kinds of regulations that can be brought in the long-term growth of AI, first, when it comes to regulations, because here we have been talking about that India has flagged certain problems. Now, flagging of problems is good, but at the same time, we need to have a framework altogether. We need to have regulations that can ensure that there is a long-term growth of AI. We cannot stop it from growing further, because until a couple of months back, we were pushing the AI a lot. We were pushing AI in various different sectors, and now all of a sudden we are saying that AI has to conform by the laws and the rules, and there are various things that we all of a sudden have started restricting them with. So that's why there are things that we need to understand. That first, when it comes to what kind of regulation should we have. So first, any regulation that we have, it should be innovation friendly. All right. So that's why having innovation friendly regulations. Now this becomes very, very crucial, because we can create regulations that encourage the innovation and research in AI. That it is something that supports the support that we are providing. It should be extended to the startups and all the established companies to experiment with maybe new ideas and while maintaining all the public safety and the trust in these systems. Similarly, to maintain the ethical standards and accountability, that establish very clear ethical guidelines for all the development and use of AI, emphasize on the importance of the transparency, fairness, etc. that we discussed, all the accountability, non-discrimination in the AI systems, they become very, very crucial. So that's why having ethical standards and accountability becomes crucial. So ethics and accountability. All right. So that's why these AI systems then can be non-discriminatory. Then similarly, when it comes to the AI systems, another important point also is for having privacy protection, that implementing robust data protection regulations that can safeguard individual privacy as well. AI systems, because often rely on very vast amount of data, and that makes it very crucial for us to ensure that this data is used in a responsible manner with all the consent and in accordance with all the privacy laws. So that's why maintaining privacy becomes crucial. Maintaining privacy and having privacy aspect in regulations is also important. Similarly, having safety and security standards. All right. So that's why having safety and security standards. Safety and security standards, because many a times when it comes to the AI systems, developing standards and guidelines to ensure that the AI systems are safe and secure is very, very important. And this can be about mechanisms that can prevent the misuse of AI technologies, and also to protect against the vulnerabilities that that can lead to maybe security breaches. And similarly, also public engagement and transparency becomes crucial. Encourage public engagement and transparency in the development of and the deployment of the AI technologies. And this can be about public consultations, ethical review boards, and maybe also publication of impact assessments for all the AI systems. So that's why taking public into account also becomes very, very crucial. So in a manner, you can say that we are talking about maintaining transparency. Similarly, what we also discussed in the previous slide as well, that having an interdisciplinary research and collaboration becomes crucial. That ensuring that we have all the kinds of people, technologists, legal experts, policymakers, all these people coming together and collaborating in ensuring that the development of AI is happening in accordance to all the required international laws and regulations as well. So that's why these are the things that can become very, very crucial, and maybe also international collaborations, because a lot of AI technologies are developing somewhere else, and that's why there are a lot of cross-border challenges also that we have, and we need to understand all that aspect also in case of having these regulations in AI. And then one last thing I would add, that they need to be adaptive. They need to be adaptive, because this is something that keeps on changing all the time. There are too many technological advancements happening every day, and that's why these regulations need to be flexible so that they can respond effectively to all the emerging challenges and opportunities in the AI field. So that's why there are all these things that they need to understand and they need to take into account. Now let's look at all the prelims related articles. The first article that we have is this: Kozhikode to have India's first cooperatives museum. Now, in this article, basically what we are saying is that what the article says is that Kozhikode is very soon to get India's first cooperatives museum, and the International Cooperatives Museum that will be set up in Kozhikode, it will showcase India's cooperative movement, and it will highlight certain brands. It will highlight certain brands that have been very important part of the cooperatives in India. So that's why, for example, Amul has been mentioned, Indian Coffee House has been mentioned, Indian Farmer Fertilizer Cooperative, Kerala Dinesh Bidi has been mentioned. So there are all these that have been mentioned, that all these brands will be highlighted there. So overall there is a 150 crore rupees project, and this is something that was started back into 1994, and this has made it world's second cooperative movement, and there is only one that is in UK apart from India. Overall, when it comes to India, India hosts over 8 lakh cooperatives right now, with a collective membership of more than 29 crores, and these are spread across states, where, for example, Maharashtra has the lead with more than 2.3 lakh societies in this particular context. So that's why we'll see that this museum will also feature the successes of India's cooperative movements. Also focus will also be on Kerala especially, and also it will include wax museum and also art galleries. So that's why we see that there are also plans to use advanced technologies like AI and also VR or virtual reality. All these are being also being incorporated in this museum. Now overall, we are talking about cooperatives. Now, what do we mean by cooperatives? Cooperatives basically are organizations that are owned and operated by a group of individuals for their mutual benefit. Now, these entities, they basically are based on principles of collective decision making and shared ownership. Very important, collective decision making and shared ownership. These two are crucial parts of any cooperative, and all the members of any cooperative, they contribute to maybe a democratically controlled business, and with the goal being fulfilling their common economic, social cultural needs and aspirations. So that's why these cooperatives, they become very, very crucial in certain cases that we have seen. For example, in case of India, we know that cooperatives in India have played a very crucial role in the socio-economic development of the country, and they have offered very significant contributions across the various sectors, whether in agriculture, in dairy, in banking, in crafts, everywhere. So that's why these cooperatives, or the importance of these cooperatives, have been very, very crucial. They have led to economic empowerment, for example. They have, or let's say they have been able to empower their members economically by providing them access to the markets, to the credits, to the inputs at very fair prices. And this is crucial, importantly, in agriculture and dairy sectors especially, where we see that we have small farmers and producers who can leverage their collective bargaining power. And that's why this is something that has also led to inclusive growth, that by providing, or let's say following these principles, we have seen that they have been able to contribute to inclusive growth. They offer opportunities for participation to various different segments of society, including the marginalized and vulnerable groups as well. And that's why we see that further it has also helped in rural development and employment. So that's why we have to understand that they have helped in inclusive growth. They have helped in inclusive growth, and this especially we see that it has helped in rural development. It has helped in rural development especially, and where they have created employment opportunities and offered services that are otherwise very hard to access in rural areas. And that's why they have contributed to building infrastructure, promote local industries, and also improving the livelihoods of people in these kind of areas. And that's why overall you can say that they have led to financial inclusion also, that there are cooperative banks and there are credit societies, and these cooperatives have been able to provide financial services to all their members as well, and especially to the ones who have not had access to traditional banking systems. So that's why it has helped in financial inclusion. So that's why it has also helped in financial inclusion. Financial inclusion. So that's why we see that there are all these things that are very, very important with regards to the role of cooperatives that we have seen in India. And lastly, you can also say that they have helped in skill development and education as well, that they have very often invested in education and training of their members and employees, and that's why it has also helped in improving their skills and productivity. So that's why they have helped in skill development as well. Skill development and education. Skill development and education. So that's why these are some important points about cooperatives in India. Then the next article, Navy demonstrates twin carrier operations. Now here we are basically talking about two. One is INS Vikramaditya and one is INS Vikrant. INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant. Now what is the context? The first edition of the Naval Commanders Conference was concluded very recently, I think on Friday. So the initial segment took place in the sea, and this is where we saw that INS Vikramaditya was able to showcase twin carrier operations with MiG-29K jets. And that's why we see that both Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant both were actually in the news. So overall, when it comes to these, we have INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant. So INS Vikramaditya. Now you might know about INS Vikramaditya that it is a modified Kiev class aircraft carrier which was originally built and commissioned in the Soviet Navy, and India had purchased the ship in 2004. After which it underwent extensive refitting and modifications so that they can be modified according to the Indian needs. And then this carrier was commissioned into the Indian Navy back in 2013. So in 2013 it was commissioned into the Indian Navy. And overall what we see is that it has been very comprehensive part of India's naval power. And overall, when it comes to this ship, we see that it also has a takeoff of aircrafts, and also it has a lot of systems that will help in the launch of the air jets or the air jets from these kind of runways. So that's why whether it is aircrafts like MiG-29 or even the helicopters that can be launched from this, and that's why it has been very formidable asset for the Indian Navy, ensuring that India has better capabilities in the seas. And similarly, when it comes to INS Vikrant, what we see with INS Vikrant is that it has become India's first indigenous aircraft carrier, which was built by Cochin Shipyard Limited. And this again, it was launched in 2013, went through very extensive sea trials before ultimately it was also commissioned into the Indian Navy. And this is the largest warship and the first aircraft carrier to be built in India, signifying a very significant step in India's self-reliance in the defense manufacturing as well. So that's why it also becomes very, very crucial. This will also be able to launch the aircrafts and also the systems for their recovery. So that's why when it comes to INS Vikrant, it can also carry a mix of MiG-29 aircrafts and also all the indigenous light combat aircrafts as well that we have in the Navy. And overall, the commissioning of INS Vikrant is not something that has not only enhanced India's maritime capabilities, but also has been very, very significant in achieving indigenous warship design and construction. Now, one small article, this is about carbon dioxide from chemical weathering has its limits. Now here in this case, this article basically what it says is that atmospheric carbon dioxide drawdown from the chemical weathering of rocks peaks across a range of moderate erosion rates according to a new study, and this has provided new insights into the constraints of weathering mediated carbon dioxide drawdown and has helped in resolving the conflicting data on the impact of erosion that we have in the carbon cycle. Now overall what it is saying is that the chemical weathering is able to mediate the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and helps, that's why it also helps in the climate of the world as well. So overall what we basically see is that when it comes to carbon cycle basically is related to how the movement of carbon happens in the Earth's atmosphere plus also the water and land. And overall basically what we see is that there is a relation that it is talking about between erosion, between chemical weathering and also carbon cycle. And that's why we need to now understand that how natural processes can also mitigate, or maybe also you can say in a manner they can influence the climate of the world. So in the context of climate change, the dynamics of how climate change is also influenced by these kind of weathering effects, we have to understand that. And then lastly, we are talking about India to gain higher investment from FTA pact with EFTA, and we discussed about this yesterday as well. This was in the news yesterday. Now what we see is that here the EFTA or European Free Trade Association is something that has been in the news, where we have 4 countries which are a part of this EFTA. We have Iceland, we have Norway, we have Switzerland, and we had discussed this yesterday also. Now I think there was one mistake in yesterday's article, that in the Hindu it had mentioned Finland instead of Iceland. There was one mistake there. So, and the 4th country being Liechtenstein. So that's why 4 countries are there, and there was one mistake that was there in yesterday's newspaper in the Hindu, I believe, that in the first paragraph itself I think they had mentioned Finland instead of Iceland being a part of these this partnership. Now overall this partnership, we discussed about this yesterday also, that this was established back in 1960 with the goal of promoting free trade and economic integration among all its members, and as well as with the rest of the world. So that is where we see that there are all these things that have been mentioned. And in this context, when it comes to this article talks about how investment and job creation can happen with regards to this free trade agreement that we have with EFTA. Now overall they have promised India a significant inflow of $100 billion in the investment, and also creating almost uh, almost 10 lakh jobs over the next 15 years. So this is very, very significant. And at the same time, we see that due to you can say very low existing tariffs on goods on EFTA countries, India's goods export are expected to gain not a lot from this FTA. But what we see is that Switzerland has become a very major trade partner with EFTA, and especially for India, it accounts for more than $1 billion out of the total 1.87 billion of Indian exports to the EFTA in the last year's cycle. So that's why we have seen that there are all these things, and with regards to that, when we look at the aspect of EFTA in the future, it will further help us in growing this business in India. Now, overall, when it comes to EFTA countries, even in agriculture, although we cannot say that a lot of growth will be seen, because they are not the countries which have significant growth aspects related to agriculture, but overall we'll see that there are other aspects of trade where they will be able to help a lot in case of India. Now, lastly, looking at the questions that we have here for you today. First, discuss the measures that Indian government should take to foster innovations while ensuring ethical use and mitigating risks associated with AI technologies. Now, we discussed about AI technologies and all the biases and all the problems that have been mentioned, and we need to counter these problems, come out with regulations and policies that can help in long-term growth of AI. So that is basically what you have to write here. And advancements in genomics over the last 2 decades have brought about significant opportunities and challenges in healthcare and research. Evaluate the steps India should take to harness the benefits of genomics in these fields. So then again, you can talk about the various fields of genetics and how genetics can be used in data management, how it can be used in healthcare. You can talk about pharmacogenomics and pharmacokinetics, and how exactly we see the use in drug administration altogether. And even if you look at the money that flows in case of biotechnology, you will find that more than 70% of biotechnology money that flows in India is in the medical research. So not in agriculture, not in industries, nowhere else, but more than 70% of the money invested in India has been in medical research with regards to genetics. So that's why there are all these aspects that you can use in writing answer to this question. Right, so this brings us to the end of today's session. I hope this session was helpful for you. Thank you very much for being here.